The other two soldiers started to go through the room, pushing and shoving the customers. One of the group at the next table held up a bag of coins and whispered something to one of the soldiers, who spat on the floor and slipped the purse into his pocket. "Another charitable contribution to the war fund," he shouted out, lifting the man's arm up high above his head. "Thought he could bribe his way out of being a traitor." No doubt, thought Jan, this and everything else they gathered would be divided with the innkeeper. The same soldier made a great show of examining the men's passports. "Look at this," he guffawed. "Forgeries! Every one of them!" He handed the passports to the officer. The travellers started to protest. The officer ignored them. "Take 'em," he ordered. "They'll enjoy a night trip to Paris." More and more of the customers were dragged out. At last, only the regulars and Jan and Sido were left. Now all eyes turned to watch the last bit of sport. "What have we got here?" said the officer, leering at Sido. "A pretty little aristo, if ever I saw one." "Excuse me, sir," said Jan in broken French. "Where are your manners? This is my sister you are speaking to. We are English." "English?" said the officer, snatching their passports. "You're too dark to be an Englishman." He sniffed and wiped his nose. Jan could feel Sido shaking beside him, and he put his arm firmly round her. "Pretty, pretty little bird. What have you to say about your brother?" Sido said nothing. "Here to learn French, eh? Bet you can speak it like a native." The officer studied their papers again, holding them up to the light. He handed them back. "Well, you can go." Jan felt Sido move, but he held her fast, knowing that to do so would give the game away. "Go on then, don't you understand any French?" bellowed the officer. It wasn't until he had gestured towards the door that Jan and Sido walked outside. The sight of all the wretched men and women rounded up, standing roped together on tumbrils, made Sido feel weak-kneed. She knew exactly where they were being taken. Back to the prisons, and certain death. "Stop!" shouted the officer, coming to the door after them. "What did you say your names were?" Jan carried on walking towards the carriage. "Hey, you lad!" shouted the officer. Jan turned and made a gesture with his hand, as if to say, "Is it me you want?" The officer waved them away. 10 out of 10 stupid fools fall for that one, he thought, saying their names out loud and clear in French, titles and all. Either that young man was honest, or he was one of the best actors he'd come across for a long time. In the rocking motion of the carriage, Sido fell fast asleep. Jan leaned back in his seat, lost in thought. He knew now what he was going to do. All those travellers tonight had needed help to escape. There must be better ways of getting people out of Paris than leaving them to the mercy of two-timing crooks like Mr. Tull and the innkeeper. The great hope of liberty, equality, fraternity, he thought sadly, appeared to have been massacred by stupidity, greed, and terror. Looking back over the day's events, he realized that every time he had worked the threads of light, he had become stronger at it. What was he going to be capable of with practice? He looked down at Sido and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. If things were different, if there were no revolution, no war, no threads of light, if he were rich, would he go back to London with her and ask for her hand in marriage? He smiled, for the answer was simple. Yes. Yes, he would. "One day I will make my fortune," he said out loud to a silent carriage. And then he stroked Sido's cheek and bent down to kiss her, whispering what his heart had always known. I love you. I always will. Cedo didn't stir. For the first time in days, she had felt safe enough to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, she sat up, dazed for a moment, not knowing where she was. And then remembering, she smiled and straightened herself out. Jan took from his knapsack a small package of letters tied with ribbon, and a letter the Marquis had written to Kaliowski. "What are these?" asked Cedo. "They're for you to read. And then you will understand and realize that you were very much loved by your mother and your father,